The Panhandle Yards, south of Chicago. June 26, 1894. 4:30 in the morning. A consist of Pullman sleeping cars has arrived from the east and is waiting to be switched through to the connecting line west. Standard work. A switchman has done this 1,000 times. The PRR cars, the lakeshore equipment, the heavy sleepers on the overnight runs to the coast. He picks up his lantern. He puts it back down. He walks away from the consist. By 6 in the morning, the word has moved through every yard in Chicago. No man who belongs to the American Railway Union will touch a train that carries a Pullman car. No switching, no coupling, no movement. The railroads try to bring in replacement workers. There are not enough of them. There are nowhere near enough of them. By the end of the first day, 15 railroads west of Chicago are stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. But by June 30th, 4 days after it began, 125,000 railroad workers on 29 lines have walked off the job. By the following week, 250,000 workers. 27 states. The American Rail Network, west of Detroit, has gone dark. This is not a riot. It is not a revolution. It is a switchman setting down his lantern on a rail yard platform in the dark. To understand the summer of 1894, you have to understand what George Pullman believed he had built. While Pullman's palace cars ran on virtually every major line in the country by the early 1890s, the Pennsylvania Railroad carried them. The New York Central carried them. The Santa Fe ran them on the run to Los Angeles. If you traveled by rail in America, first class, overnight, any luxury consist, you slept in something George Pullman had made. In 1880, Pullman built a town to house the workers who built his cars. The town of Pullman, 14 miles south of Chicago on Lake Calumet. Company housing, a company church, a company stores, company schools. The rent was deducted directly from wages before a worker saw a dollar. The Illinois Bureau of Labor Statistics called it the most complete example of industrial paternalism in the country. George Pullman called it a model community. Then, the panic of 1893 arrived. The worst economic collapse the country had seen since the Civil War. Railroad orders for new Pullman cars dried up overnight. Pullman cut his workforce from 5,500 to roughly 3,300. What the men he kept, he cut their wages by 25%. He did not cut the rent. Before we go further, if this kind of railroad history matters to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Every video here is built around real American locomotives, real engineering decisions, and the real stories behind the iron highways that connected this country. If that's the kind of history worth preserving to you, the subscribe button is how you tell us. And we want to hear from you. How did you work the railroads? As an engineer, a fireman, a conductor, a machinist, a dispatcher? Did a father or grandfather spend their career on the high iron? Did you grow up in a railroad town, Cheyenne, Altoona, Sparks, Topeka, Collinwood? Leave it in the comments. The people who actually worked these locomotives and these routes know things no archive has ever recorded. We want to hear from them. Now, back to the locomotive. The numbers in Pullman, Illinois, and in the winter of 1893 told the real story. A skilled carpenter earning $11 a week before the wage cut was now taking home roughly $8. After the automatic rent deduction, which came off the top before the worker saw anything, he was left with approximately $2.60. For a week's work, several workers documented taking home less, paychecks of $1.50. In at least one recorded case, a paycheck of 7 cents after rent. Meanwhile, the Pullman Palace Car Company did not miss a single quarterly dividend payment to shareholders during the Depression. George Pullman drew his full salary. The company's financial position was his primary concern. His workers' financial position was, in his view, a separate question. In the spring of 1894, a grievance committee came to General Manager Thomas Wicks and asked for either a wage increase or a rent reduction. Wicks declined both. 3 members of that committee were fired the following day. On May 11, 1894, and at 9 in the morning, 4,000 Pullman factory workers walked out in an orderly line. No violence, no destruction of property. They simply did not go back through the gate. One worker said before the walkout, "We do not expect the company to concede. We know we are working for less than will maintain our families. On that proposition, we absolutely refuse to work any longer." Eugene Victor Debs was 38 years old in the spring of 1894, a former locomotive fireman from Terre Haute, Indiana. The president of the American Railway Union, founded June 1893, 150,000 members, the largest industrial union in the country, not organized by craft, not limited to engineers or firemen or conductors. Every man who worked for a railroad. Debs did not want a national boycott. He had just won a clean victory against the Great Northern Railway in April. Wages restored, arbitration completed. The kind of result that built credibility. A fight with the General Managers Association, 24 railroads coordinating out of Chicago, was a different calculation. He tried to force arbitration. George Pullman refused. "There is nothing to arbitrate," Pullman said. His labor situation was, in his view, a question of business and nothing more. On June 22nd, the ARU convention voted, unless Pullman submitted to arbitration by June 26th, the boycott would begin. 3 committees were sent to Pullman in the following days, and all 3 were turned away. On June 26th, Debs launched the boycott. The switchmen in the yards understood immediately. A Pullman car on any consist made the entire train untouchable. Within a day, 15 lines west of Chicago were stopped. Within 4 days, 125,000 workers on 29 railroads. The railroads could not move freight west of Detroit. The U.S. mail had stopped moving. Debs sent thousands of telegrams to ARU locals every day. Nearly all of them said the same thing: stay calm. Stay nonviolent, hold the line. Attorney General Richard Olney had spent his career as a railroad attorney before taking the cabinet post. He was not a disinterested party. On July 2nd, Olney secured a federal court injunction against the ARU from Judges Peter Grosscup and William Woods, both selected in part for their anti-union records. The injunction was written so broadly that it effectively made any union communication illegal. Debs called it a Gatling gun on paper. He continued to send telegrams to ARU locals urging restraint. Under the terms of the injunction, those telegrams alone were grounds for arrest. President Grover Cleveland ordered federal troops to Chicago on July 3rd. Governor John Altgeld of Illinois had specifically offered his state militia to maintain order, and specifically asked Cleveland not to send the army. Cleveland overruled him and sent the troops anyway. They arrived on the 4th of July, 1894. What followed was not a restoration of order. Violence broke out between strikers, Pinkerton agents, and federal troops in the South Side yards. Freight cars were burned. At Blue Island, a mail train locomotive was derailed. By the end of the conflict, 34 people were dead across the strike zone. Railroad property damage exceeded $340,000. On July 10th, Debs was arrested, charged with contempt of court and criminal conspiracies to obstruct the U.S. mail. The ARU's offices were raided the same day. His unopened personal mail was seized. Without its leadership, the boycott collapsed. The strike ended August 2nd. George Pullman never negotiated. The workers lost on every count. The Pullman Company reopened the shops and began hiring back, but only workers who signed a yellow dog contract, pledging never to join a union while employed by Pullman. More than 1,600 workers were never rehired. Blacklisted. The ARU was finished as an organization. In May 1895, the Supreme Court upheld Debs's conviction unanimously. Debs served 6 months in the county jail in Woodstock, Illinois, a town chosen specifically because federal authorities feared mass demonstrations if he were held closer to Chicago. He read Marx, Bellamy, and Gronlund in his cell. He emerged a socialist. He ran for president on the Socialist Party ticket in 1900, then 1904, 1908, 1912. In 1920, he ran from a federal prison cell in Atlanta, serving a sentence for opposing American entry into the First World War, and received nearly 1 million votes. A young railroad attorney named Clarence Darrow quit his job as general counsel for the Chicago and Northwestern Railway to defend Debs at trial. It was the beginning of the most consequential labor law career in American history. George Pullman died on October 19, 1897, 3 years after the strike. His family buried him at night in Graceland Cemetery, Chicago. The casket was lead-lined. The pit was 8 feet deep, its walls and floor reinforced with steel and concrete. Asphalt was poured over the casket, then more concrete, and then steel rails laid across the top. A Corinthian column was placed above the grave. The federal commission that investigated the strike described the operations of Pullman's company town as un-American. Grover Cleveland, the president who had sent the army over the governor's objection, who had broken the largest railroad strike in American history, signed Labor Day into federal law 6 days after the boycott ended. Not out of conviction, out of calculation. He needed to offer something to the working class before the November elections. That decision bought him very little. Cleveland lost the Democratic nomination in 1896. He never held office again. The town of Pullman still stands on Chicago's South Side. Barack Obama declared it a national monument in 2015. The factory is gone. The Hotel Florence still stands. The streets are laid out exactly as George Pullman drew them, ordered, controlled, every lot the same distance from every other. Labor Day falls every year on the first Monday in September. Most Americans know it as the end of summer. Very few know it was created in 6 days to quiet the anger of men who had been given 7-cent paychecks and asked to keep working. The railroad network that 250,000 men refused to move in the summer of 1894 still runs. Different owners, different locomotives. CSX moves coal through Chicago today on the same rail corridors the switchman walked away from. Eugene Debs is buried in Terre Haute, Indiana. His grave is a modest stone. George Pullman is under several tons of reinforced concrete in Graceland Cemetery. The exact location is not on any public map. He got what he wanted in the end. Almost nobody remembers his name. If this is the kind of railroad history you want to keep watching, subscribe to the channel. There are more locomotives, more forgotten experiments, more untold stories from the steam and diesel era still to document. Oh, and if you have a connection to what you just heard, a grandfather who ran one of these engines, a father who worked the roundhouse, someone who was on the footplate when this era was still running, tell us in the comments. What did they operate? Which road? Which run? The men who drove these locomotives didn't leave many records behind, but the people who knew them are still here. We want to hear from them.